Hello, and welcome to WIN TV's book discussion program for today. We have a most unusual program in that we have both the author of the book and the son of the subject of the book. The book is The Odyssey of a Polish Patriot, a thoroughly researched and carefully documented history of a Polish aviator who escaped from the Nazis at the beginning of World War II and who traversed overland across Europe to reach France and eventually England, where he trained to be part of a special operations unit that was sent to Africa, and then moved to Italy, where he flew extremely dangerous, covert, night missions, dropping agents and supplies to partisan groups throughout occupied Europe. He was flying at the time for the Royal Air Force. My guests today are Kaz, short for Kazimierz. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Kazimierz.
Okay. Kazimierz. Okay, Skoczylas.
Right.
The son of Ludwik Skoczylas, the Polish Patriot aviator flying for the RAF. And the author of this book, Jack LaPlante. Both men have had distinguished careers. By way of introduction, and both of these guys are too modest to toot their own horn, I'll toot it for them. Kaz settled in East Hartford after he and his family emigrated from England in 1953. After serving in the United States Air Force, Kaz began a highly successful career in the banking profession, serving as president and CEO of a community bank and ultimately founding the Windsor Bank and Trust Company in 1973. He and his wife Patricia currently reside in the Pequannock section of Windsor. Jack LaPlante established a 40-year career in public education, serving the students of Hartford Public High School, the second oldest high school in the country after the Boston Latin School, as a history teacher, and for 25 years as its head football coach, during which time he also served as track and field coach along with two-time Olympic gold medal winner Lindy Remigino. Moreover, Jack and his high school football team were the subject of yet another book, an award-winning House of Good Hope, written by Michael Downs, formerly a journalist at the Hartford Courant and now professor of literature at Towson State University. There, the cat's out of the bag. You two have nowhere to hide. In the long line of historiographies emanating out of World War II, perhaps none of them was inspired by two simple sentences written in a story in a totally unrelated book, a collection of mini-memoirs of kids growing up in the Cold War years of the 1950s. But this book, The Odyssey of the Polish Patriot, was indeed inspired by two lines written in this book, Stories from the 50s. Which was also written by this man, featuring a story written by this man, looking at Kaz, of course, yes. I screwed that up. In the story written by Kaz, Work Smarter, Not Harder, he told of selling newspapers on Sunday mornings outside a church in East Hartford, and the advice his father had given him, including these two lines. As a young man, my father escaped from Poland during the Nazi occupation. He did it by riding on the top of railroad cars at night and hiding in the daytime. My first question, therefore, to Kaz, in a story about selling newspapers in front of a church on Sunday mornings, how did these two sentences find their way into your story?
Well, in my story for Jack's book, Stories from the 50s, East Hartford Style, I mentioned that my father had died and I had to get a paper route to help with finances for our family. I had 110 Sunday customers and 85 daily customers. The total time it took me was probably 1 to 2 hours to do the delivering and countless hours to do the collections. The route was nearly a mile from home. I explained how my dad escaped from Poland to England, overcoming many difficulties and impossible situations. So some advice he gave me was, work smarter, not harder. So I titled my story, Work Smarter, Not Harder. I traded in my paper route and established a newspaper stand outside our local church on Sundays with my friend Nicky Washburn. This brought in more money as we sold 300 papers each Sunday and had no collection time involved. Great advice, Dad.
Indeed. Question then for Jack. It's a double-barrel question. How is this book different from the book you originally set out to write? And how did Kaz's 2 sentences change all that?
Well, I'll start with the second question first. Kaz's 2 sentences. Originally, after I finished this book about East Hartford, I wanted to write a book about heroes, but not heroes in the sense Jackie Robinson, Harriet Tubman, Franklin Roosevelt, whoever you wanted it, the ones that we already know. But I wanted them to be about people that no one knew about. And these 2 lines, when I was reading Kaz's and his sister's stories that they had given me to put in the book, I said, well, I think this gentleman, Ludwik Skoczylas, is going to be one of these people. I know outside of the family, nobody here knew what that name meant and who that person was. So I put him on the list along with a student of mine at Hartford Public who basically showed me the grace and dignity of how to live a life under the imminent threat of death, which he had a disease that was just didn't bother him. Actually, he was supposed to die when he was like 10 years old, and he made it through his first year at Central Connecticut State University. So Ludwig, along with this youngster, Jose, won't give his last name, and a person close to me, a priest, who actually was my wife's brother-in-law, what he went through when he was stricken with melanoma from all his missionary work down in Honduras. So those 3 were, I was beginning to write an outline on each, and I started with Ludwig. As soon as I started reading and starting to do a little research to lengthen the outline, I said to myself, this is a story unto itself. And that's how I got to not drop the other 2, but concentrate solely on this gentleman. I also had, my father himself was a Marine in World War II, and I know what he went through. And I said, I'm going to find out what this fellow did. Now, I'm half Polish, so I have a vested interest in what happened to the Poles. And this gentleman here was a beacon for me. So I decided to stick with this book, and there it is.
Kaz, I'm interested in knowing, what was your initial reaction to the fact that Jack, not really well known to you at the time, was writing a book about your father's World War II heroics?
Well, I enjoyed reading Jack's first book, Stories from the 50s East Hartford Style. And again, me and my sister submitted stories, which he published. And I was pleasantly surprised that Jack wanted to write a book about my father. I never really thought of him as a hero. I knew some of what he did during the war, but little of what he had experienced to escape from Poland and get to England. Jack's extensive research and creative mind brought all that to light and really did prove that my father was a hero. If you read the book, I think you'll agree with it.
This book, Jack, did require a tremendous amount of original research and documentation. Can you tell us where you started?
Yes, I started with a wonderful primary source, a person who lived everything that Ludwig went through for the most part, and that was his wife, Kazik's mother, Nellie. Nellie Smith from England. I, with the cooperation of Kazik and Banda, Nellie's 2 kids, they gave me permission to visit the mother. And if you're familiar with the book called Tuesdays with Maury, which was quite a great book to read, I started something called Wednesdays with Nellie, with the approval of Kajik and Banda. And I learned so much about what the times, the happiness, the troubles, all that at that time, not only in England but in the United States when they immigrated here in the 1950s. She was probably the best source of information I could get because it was all firsthand. Her intellect, her memory, her humor, her recollection of events and people was just fabulous. It really helped me get started well. In addition to Nellie, I started reading books, one in particular called The Forgotten Feud, which the family had, and that gave me some insight as to what was going on in Europe with the Polish Air Force at that time. I also, of course, Googled a lot of information. I contacted Polish organizations in London and in Warsaw, and a couple of gentlemen, one in London at the Sikorsky Museum in London, provided me with information that I use as background, and the fellow in Warsaw sent me a partial logbook that they had of Ludwik and the flights that he made from Italy. In addition to that, I talked to people who were Polish, especially folks from the North End in Manchester, which used to be loaded with people. And I'm also a member of the Polish National Home, and I spoke to people there. So all these folks and organizations really helped me get started. That's where I did my research.
What surprised you, Jack, about your subject, Ludwik Skoczylas, Polish Patriot?
You know, the first thing I thought of was my father, and then now I have Kajik's and Vanda's father, and they both, my father was in the Pacific in the Marines, and Ludwik flew for both the Royal Air Force and the Polish Air Force. I wanted to really get a flavor of what was going on in Europe. What I found out about Ludwik is, by the way, Ludwik actually went to the Polish Naval Academy. Most people never even knew that Poland had a naval academy. That showed me he had great intelligence and intellect, and he wasn't afraid to work. I know he grew up on a farm, and I have a part in the book where he explains how farm work helped him. It taught him organization, taught him teamwork, it taught him how you had to be organized to be successful. Also, his physical stature. I've never been at the controls of a B-24 Liberator or any of the other planes that Ludwik flew, but you had to be extremely strong. If you flew 11 to 12 hours back and forth under the most difficult circumstances, you were flying mostly at night with no lights and anything. You had to really have great eyesight. Ludwik did all of that. I was also impressed with his, what they called turn of hand, which meant in England, I'm not sure about the United States, but he could do anything with his hands. He could take anything apart and put it back together without any error. He could make things, he could build things, he could draw things. I mean, he did work with bronze, he did work with paper, he could sew anything. He was a Renaissance man, so to speak. He could do anything. So that's what really impressed me about this fellow. I said, this is a unique individual.
Kaz, did you learn anything about your father from this book that you didn't know or that surprised you?
Yeah, I did. His journey across Romania, Hungary, Yugoslavia, northern Italy, France, and into England was quite a journey. I didn't realize he'd hit all those countries. It took him almost a year to do that because the Nazis were after them from one end and the Russians were at the other end. Poland had fallen, obviously. But the most surprising thing I got was he had a girlfriend named Basha in Hungary. Now, I guess you don't really think about that, but there's a picture of them in the book. And I said to Jack, where did you get that picture? It wasn't photoshopped. And he said, I got it from your mother. And I said, my mother had a picture of my father and his girlfriend? And Jack said, yes. And I said, wow. It took me a while to realize that, okay, it was long before he met my mother. He was single, he was young, he was handsome, and it was wartime. So you should expect something like that. But it really surprised me. Really did.
Sure.
If I may, I could pick up on that.
Yeah.
When I talked to your ma, I said, you know, Nellie, he's in Budapest, and he's a good-looking fella, as you mentioned, and it's wartime, and I remember being a veteran. I'm sure you remember. There's no doubt in my mind he's going to meet ladies, and I'm sure from the meeting certain things are going to happen. So your ma stopped me right there. She says, I know what you want to say. You write whatever you want. Like you said, I didn't know him then. He said, but do me a favor. When you write about any relationship they have, make it toasty.
Toasty.
That's what I love about your mother. Has such a great sense of humor. God bless her. Yeah.
He did.
You know, throughout this book, Jack, there are many references to Ludwig's spirituality, despite the girlfriend. What role do you think this spirituality played in his battle against the Nazis?
So one of the major themes in this book is his faith, his absolute, unequivocal faith to his God, to his church, especially to the mother of Christ, Mary. He has told his family when he suffered a plane crash coming back from a mission in northern Italy. His plane, due to circumstances, controls locked up, he crashed in the Adriatic Sea. And as the plane was sinking, he was strapped in from the impact. He could not get out. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get out. And as the water was rising, he felt, this is what he told Nellie, he felt the cold water turn warm, and he began to pray that Mary would come and save him. And then he saw this light coming at him, and in his mind, or he saw Jesus' mother, Mary, riding on this brilliant cloud of light. And he blacked out as he went under the water, but when he woke up, he was in the Campo Casale, his base hospital. And no matter how many people told him that two black American soldiers pulled him out of the water, he said, that's fine, and thank God for them, but they did not loosen the straps on my body. That was Mary. So I make reference to that in the book. His faith was so strong. I mean, how many people on their wedding night, when they got ready for bed, would say to their wife, before we go to sleep, I want you to come with me. And what they did was kneel beside the bed and pray. Thankfulness for surviving, thankfulness so far for being together. Now, how many people do that? So his faith was just phenomenal. There's no doubt about it. And I write in the story that with faith comes hope. Hope for Poland becoming independent again, hope for surviving the war and raising the family with his beautiful bride, which he called Zaganka, which means in Polish, the gypsy. She looked like a gypsy with her long black curly hair, beautiful young woman.
Well, interesting story.
Yeah.
There's an anecdote you talked about earlier. You mentioned General Sikorsky,
Yes.
head of the Polish government in exile in London during the war. Tell that story, how...
Yeah, very quickly. When the Poles were in England, they were ordered there would be no intermarriage between a Polish serviceman and an English woman unless there was a pregnancy involved. Now, there was no pregnancy involved, but Nellie, who was, by the way, a beautiful writer, Kasia, as you probably know, and either in Polish or English, she wrote to the commander-in-chief of all Polish forces in England and asked permission from him to marry Ludwik. It'd be like one of us writing a letter to the President of the United States and asking him or her to make an exception because we wanted permission from him or her to get married. And Sikorsky granted that. When Ludwik told his commanders, I think Peter Guy was his direct commander, to be his best man, they asked him, who you marrying? And you're not supposed to marry. And he produced a little letter from General Sikorsky that said, give this man 2 weeks to be married to this lovely lady. That's an amazing thing.
That really is an amazing story. Kaz, what would you add to all of this at this point?
Well, like Jack had said, my father could do anything. I love to say to other kids, whatever your father can do, my father can do it better. He fixed watches, he made jewelry, he was a welder, he could do a roof. He used to process meats, you know. Him and my uncle would go and buy a pig and smoke it. I'd go down the cellar, there'd be kielbasa's hanging from the ceiling and hams hanging there, curing. He was always working. He was a master mechanic for Russ Seeley Motors in Hartford, well respected by everyone that did business with them. And people like the Fuller Brush brothers, the guys that owned Fuller Brush. They trusted him with their cars. And as I say, I didn't know my father that well because I was 15 when he passed, but I wish I had.
Jack, let's talk for a moment, we're almost out of time, about how our viewing audience can acquire a copy of the Odyssey of the Polish Patriot.
The best, the folks here at WIN will supply a sign which will be a part of the show here, but the best way to get a book is to go to this website called store.bookbaby.com. store.bookbaby.com. And when that comes up, just search for, you can use the title of the book, The Odyssey of a Polish Patriot, or you can use my name, Jack LaPlante. And a plethora of places you can purchase the book, either in print or ebook, whatever you like. Okay.
Okay, that's just about all the time we have for...
I've got one thing to add,
Go ahead.
if I might. I gave it copies of the book before it was officially printed to some of the people in my setback group here at the Windsor Senior Center. And just to read a couple of reviews, if you will. Penny Marchuk said it was intriguing, sensitive book with a sense of history. And Karen Rosal said the book was a good read, very informative. It was difficult to put down once I started reading it. And another one that, without the name, She said, I usually skip over pages. She says, I read every word on every page. So, even though it was my father, I can say it really is an interesting book.
Job well done, Jack, from the sound of it.
I appreciate that.
Solicited
Thank you for that, Kaz.
compliments. And that's about it for our show today. We want to thank you viewers for being with us. This has been WIN's book discussion group for today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.